Hello everyone and welcome back to 25. Today's passage that we'll be reading is somewhere coming from the domain of gender studies, and also it has an element of sociology, or you can say sociological perspectives. Let us read through the passage to understand more about what the author is trying to say. The concept of masculinity is complex, having various definitions, historical roots, and logical approaches, and the common sense definition of the term tend to fall into one of our approaches: essentialist, positivist, normative, and semiotic. So when you talk about semiotic, it is something that is related to meaning. Essentialist definitions single out a core characteristic, usually biological traits such as sex and development, and develop their account on masculinity based on the essential characteristic. So basically इन्होंने 4 टाइप के हम लोगों को अप्रोचेस बताए हैं जिसके बेसिस पे हम किसी को एक मैस्कुलिन जेंडर जो है एफिलिएट करते हैं. सबसे पहला essentialist. So what is essential to be characterized as a male? We are talking about the biological trait of having the sex of a male and develop their account of masculinity based on this essential characteristic. Second is positivist. Positivist social science attempts to provide an objective account of masculinity based on what men actually are. So we are talking about the social science characteristics of who are masculine men, or what masculine men are, or probably what men are actually are. Normative definitions recognize some of the internal contradictions found in various forms of masculinity and instead posit a standard for men to attain. What men ought to be. What men are is positivist, what they ought to be is normative. Semiotic focus on symbolic understandings of masculinity and place it in relation to femininity, in effect defining it as not femininity. So anything that is not femininity is something that is masculinity. All 4 types of definitions suffer from flaws. Essential approaches are problematic because the choice of what characteristic is essential to masculinity is arbitrary, it's random, and not essentially at all. Positive approaches, while claiming to be neutral and objective, nevertheless assume that people already have been sorted into the categories men and women, and then proceed to measure the differences between those putatively distinct groups. In doing so, they never ask the really important question about how gender itself is constituted and through gendered social relations. Just giving an example, when girls are born, we give them the color pink. When boys are born, we give them the color blue. So, who is giving this gender notion? It is not something by birth, but it is something that is very positivist because this is how the social relations or social characteristics develop with regards to gender. Normative approaches tend to think of masculinity as a role to which men aspire, what they want to be like. However, men rarely meet the complex restrictions of such roles. So, there is, of course, in this particular approach, there is a difference between reality and expectations. Semiotics approaches are most sophisticated and often form the basis of important words in feminist geography and cultural studies, but they still tend to focus too heavily on textual and discursive aspects of social life. So first we are talking about the definitions, then we are talking about the flaws. In response to the pitfalls in these definitions, social theorists who study gender have developed a more critical definition of masculinity. Connell, for example, suggested that masculinity should be understood more broadly as a set of practices by which men and women locate themselves in gender relations, articulate with that place in gender, and produce gendered effects on others and themselves. So basically, we are talking about the activities, certain set of activities which are defining the gender relations and the gender roles, and what are going to be the effects on themselves and others. This kind of definition is important because it allows us to understand the temporal contingency of masculinity. However, it fails to account for the geographic specificity of different masculinities. Here is why geographers, अब यहाँ पे हमने पहले बात किया है जेंडर का, जेंडर से हमने बात किया एक सोशल एस्पेक्ट का, अब सोशल एस्पेक्ट से हम कोई एक ज्योग्राफिकल कॉन्स्ट्रक्ट पे आ रहे हैं. Here is where geographers have made important contributions to understanding the concept. Indeed, given the importance of the context in the construction of masculinity, it should be very clear that masculinity is both temporary and geographically contingent. In other words, time and space make for different masculinities. So basically, at different places, there is going to be a different attribute of being masculine and vice versa. Thus, it is much more helpful to think of not of single masculinity but rather multiple masculinities. In addition, any one masculinity as a product of practice can be simultaneously positioned in different structural relationships. Accordingly, masculinities always are complex and contradictory. They are highly contingent, unstable, contested spaces with gender relations. This is why we speak of hegemonic, that is, dominating, and subordinate masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity confirm, that is, agree to the dominant social relations even when it goes against the individual's best interest. Subordinate masculinity diverge from these ideas and may challenge them. It is this paradoxical stability and instability of masculinity, especially the importance of context for understanding how masculinities are constructed, that makes important to understand their geographic character. So basically they are talking about two types of masculinity. One is hegemonic, जहां पे जबरदस्ती, क्योंकि एक dominant social relation है that a man cannot cry, a man cannot be weak. You try to follow those particular rules because they have been forced upon you by the society. On the contrary, when you talk about a subordinate masculinity, what is a subordinate masculinity? Where you defy all these norms that have been put upon you through social relations. So there is no specific definition of masculinity. All the four definitions that are given have flaws. We've been told about the gender perspective, social perspective, and the geographical perspective of a common term like masculinity. Let us look at the questions. All of the following is not inferred from the passage except a double negative question, right? Now, if you look at this particular question, first point says biological traits alone are not enough to provide a comprehensive understanding of masculinity. अब ये बोलता है कि they are not alone and they cannot provide a comprehensive or somewhat an accurate understanding of masculinity. Makes a lot of sense. इन्होंने क्या बोला? All of the following is not inferred from the passage except. That means three are inferred. It is only one that is not inferred. If you look at option number B, three are not inferred. It is only one that is inferred. Masculinity is usually oppressive, forcing individuals to conform to dominant societal norms. कहीं पे भी नहीं बोला है कि oppressive है. The concept of masculinity, उन्होंने क्या बोला है? हेजेमनी किस फॉर्म में है? हेजेमनी आपको डोमिनेशन, आपको सोसाइटी बताती है कि एक डोमिनेंट ओपिनियन है. डोमिनेंट ओपिनियन का मतलब ये नहीं है कि कोई एक जेंडर जो है वो डोमिनेटिंग है. The concept of masculinity cannot be studied objectively through different theoretical approaches. अब सी कॉन्ट्रोडिक्ट कर रहा है क्योंकि हमारे को जो बोला है कि पॉजिटिविस्ट जो है वो एक बहुत ऑब्जेक्टिव स्टडी है. सो चारों पर्सपेक्टिव्स में से पॉजिटिव को तो ऑब्जेक्टिव बोला है. सो हाउ कैन इट बी दैट दे कैन नॉट बी स्टडीड ऑब्जेक्टिवली? वन कैन बी. Masculinity should be understood as an ineffective way to categorize non-feminine gender. Ineffective जो है वो बहुत ज्यादा strong word है जो यहाँ पे हमने इस्तेमाल किया है. There is no consensus, yes, but it is not an ineffective way. So the correct answer would be option number A. Biological traits alone are not enough to provide a comprehensive understanding of masculinity. Absolutely correct. Which of the following is not a valid inference? Which of the following cannot be deduced from the text? If you look at option number A, subordinate masculinity diverge from dominant ideals and may challenge or contest prevailing norms. ये आपको यहाँ पे clearly दे रखा है कि जो हमारा hegemony है वहां पे कहीं ना कहीं हम लोगों को ये बता रखा है कि जो subordinate वाला है they diverge from the ideas and they may challenge them. This is given, so ये तो inference है तो ये आंसर नहीं हो सकता. The individual agency is ultimately what ultimately determines the result of masculinity, and one of those results is the paradoxical instability of masculinity. Point number B हमारा correct answer क्यों नहीं हो सकता? क्योंकि passage ये state कर रहा है कि paradoxical stability and instability ये stem out कहाँ से होता है? टाइम से, स्पेस से, स्ट्रक्चर्ड रिलेशनशिप से, विद इन द जेंडर रिलेशंस, एंड नॉट फ्रॉम एन इंडिविजुअल एजेंसी. वी आर टॉकिंग अबाउट लॉट ऑफ फैक्टर्स. तो इंडिविजुअल एजेंसी नहीं है, दे आर लॉट ऑफ फैक्टर्स, जिसमें से हमारा सोसाइटी हो गया, ज्योग्राफी हो गया, टाइम हो गया, स्पेस हो गया, ये सारी चीजें दे रखी हैं. सो द करेक्ट आंसर फॉर दिस क्वेश्चन वुड बी ऑप्शन नंबर बी. Hegemonic masculinity confirm, that is, agree to dominant social norms? Yes, they do. Connell proposed a critical definition of masculinity, highlighting the importance of practices and gender relations in shaping masculinity. Yes, they do. Right? Or he did. So the correct answer would be option number B. Time and space make for different masculinity. Which of the following is the best interpretation of this sentence? अब कहीं ना कहीं टाइम का मतलब क्या है? हिस्ट्री के बारे में आप बात कर रहे हो. स्पेस का मतलब क्या है? स्पेस इज रिलेटेड टू द प्लेस. तो आप ज्योग्राफी के बारे में बात कर रहे हो. सो बेसिकली इसका मतलब क्या है कि डिफरेंट मैस्कुलिनिटी जो है वो कहीं ना कहीं हिस्टोरिकल एंड ज्योग्राफिकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट में हमेशा स्टैटिक एंड यूनिवर्सल चलती है. राइट? सो मैस्कुलिनिटी इज पैराडॉक्सिकल, due to which inherent instability because of the geographical space and time continuum. यहाँ पे पैराडॉक्स की कुछ नहीं बात की है. ये तो बोल रहा टाइम एंड स्पेस दे मेक फॉर डिफरेंट मैस्कुलिनिटी. The definition of masculinity varies depending on the linkage between subjective and collective experience. Absolutely incorrect. Masculinity as perceived by geographers depends on their own perception of men के perception पे related नहीं है space and time. The concept of masculinity is not universal but contingent upon the historical and geographical context. So time is related to history and space that is related to place is related to the geographical context. उसने पूरे पैसेज में कहीं ना कहीं हमें ये बोला है ना कि डिफरेंट मैस्कुलिनिटी जो है वो क्या है? वो ये कॉन्सेप्ट है कि मैस्कुलिनिटी का कॉन्सेप्ट किस तरह से कंस्ट्रक्ट किया गया है, दैट वेरीज टेम्परली and geographically. It is geographically contingent. That means it is not universal. It is something that varies across time and space. So the correct answer would be option number D. It can be reasonably inferred from the passage that the flaw common to the four definitions of masculinity, essentialist, positivist, normative, and semiotic, can be best summed up in which of the following? इसमें अब हम लोगों को क्या बताया है? पैराग्राफ में शुरुआत में हमें चारों डेफिनेशंस दी हैं, उसके बाद हमें कॉनल का मॉडल दिया है एंड ज्योग्राफर्स का व्यू दिया है, जहां पे दे आर स्टेटिंग दैट they are just giving us definitions and they are not related to time and space. They are not considering time and space. Right? So इसका मतलब क्या है कि उनका कहीं ना कहीं जो अप्रोच है वो कंटेक्चुअली करेक्ट ही नहीं है. आपने सिर्फ परिभाषा दे दी बट लॉजिकली वो टाइम एंड स्पेस में फिट इन हो ही नहीं रही. So the correct answer would be, if you look at option number A, they all have a non-contextual approach. Absolutely correct. They all excessively focus on discursive aspects. Discursive aspect का जो बोला है वो सिर्फ semiotic का है, not the other definitions. They all create unrealistic expectation. This is again according to the normative, जहाँ पे बोला गया है बहुत clearly. They all position one gender against another. ये one gender against another against semiotic versus positivist में था, बाकी चारों में नहीं, मतलब सारे चारों में नहीं. So the correct answer for this question is option number A. So I hope you found this particular passage to be very interesting and I hope you've understood the concepts that we've discussed. I'll see you in another engaging session of the reading comprehension. Till then, like I always say, keep reading and keep enjoying your